Why are you here? You were explicitly uninvited. My daughter's fiancé shouted during the wedding reception I was funding, his features twisted with fury. I managed a faint smile, concealing the sting of betrayal, and said, "I'm leaving, but first I want you to meet a special guest, an old associate of yours." The moment he saw who it was, his eyes went wide with terror, and he collapsed. The wheels of justice were only beginning to turn. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The front door flew open with such force that the framed photos on my hallway wall trembled. "Father, I'm engaged." Clara exploded into the room, out of breath and red-cheeked, extending her left hand toward me as if it were a shield. The diamond glittered in the evening light, casting small rainbows on her face. I placed my teacup down, the nightly news murmuring from the television. "My congratulations, sweetheart." "When did Evan?" "Last night, at that French bistro on Larimer." Her tone had a sharp quality, as if she were anticipating an argument before I had a chance to speak. She shrugged off her jacket with abrupt motions, letting it fall onto my armchair. "I know what you're thinking." "And what is that?" "That he isn't right for me, that I'm moving too fast, that I need more time to really get to know him." On and on. She paced over to the window before whirling around to face me. "Look, I'm 28 years old, Father. I can make my own choices." I observed her expression, the strained smile, how her fingers fidgeted with the new ring. After 40 years in investment banking, I had learned how to interpret people. The individuals who spoke the quickest often had the most to conceal. "Have you picked a date?" "August 15th. That leaves us with 2 months to arrange everything." She moved to the sofa, sitting on the very edge as though she might flee at any second. "Evan wants something sophisticated, elegant, the type of wedding that leaves an impression. 2 months seems quite rushed, for we don't want to wait." The words burst out of her. "Why would we? When you know, you just know, isn't that right?" "That's what you always said about Mom." The comparison hurt because it was not the same. "Your mother and I were together for 3 years before our engagement, but bringing that up now would only fuel Clara's defensiveness. Where are you considering holding it?" "The Brown Palace Hotel. Evan has some contacts there." She smoothed her dress, looking away from me. "It's going to be gorgeous. Maybe 200 guests, 200 people at the Brown Palace." I performed a quick calculation in my head and was not pleased with the number. "That seems very costly. It will run about 50,000, perhaps 60. She finally met my gaze, her chin held high in defiance. "I know it's a huge sum, but it's my wedding, Father. My only wedding. I want it to be flawless." And there it was. The true purpose behind the theatrical entrance, the defensive posture, the accelerated timeline. Evan desired a lavish wedding, and Clara expected me to finance it. $50,000. "You said you would chip in when I got married. You made a promise to Mom before she passed away that you'd ensure I had a beautiful wedding." Her voice trembled slightly. "Please don't tell me you're backing out of that promise now." She was correct. I had made that promise to Diane, but Diane would have taken months to get to know Evan, posing questions, ensuring he was deserving of our daughter. Diane would have seen right through his polished veneer in under 5 minutes. "Of course, I'll contribute to the wedding." The words escaped me before I could reconsider. "But perhaps we could go over the budget." "Thank you." She sprang up and gave me a kiss on the cheek. Her mood changed so rapidly it was disorienting. "Evan will be so thrilled. He's been stressed about the finances, trying to see how they could manage it on his startup salary." Another warning sign. What kind of man proposes when he lacks the means to marry? Perhaps I should take Evan out to dinner. Get to know my future son-in-law a little better. That's a fantastic idea. He's been hoping to discuss his business concepts with you. He has a great deal of respect for accomplished entrepreneurs like you. She picked up her coat, suddenly in a hurry to depart. I should go tell him the good news about the wedding finances. She was already at the door before I could rise. "Clara, wait." "Love you, Dad. Thanks for being so understanding." The door shut with a quiet click, leaving me in the silence with the drone of the television and the resonance of her words. I looked at the closed door for a long time. The house felt unnaturally quiet, unnaturally vast. $50,000 for a wedding to a man I hardly knew, for a daughter who was becoming a stranger. I switched off the television and took my teacup to the kitchen. The house had a different atmosphere after Clara's chaotic visit, thick with unspoken conflicts and unresolved discussions. I washed the cup in the sink, performing the automatic motions of my nightly routine as my mind replayed every word, every guarded gesture. The kitchen still held the faint aroma of the shepherd's pie I'd warmed for my meal, Diane's recipe, though I never quite got her spice blend right. I wiped the countertops, adjusted the hand towel, doing anything to occupy my hands as my thoughts swirled. $50,000. The figure kept re-emerging, sharp and insistent. I went into my study, guided by an impulse I could not define. The room contained 2 decades of a life lived, business accolades collecting dust, photo albums Diane had meticulously arranged, and tax records stored in perfect chronological order. I took an album from the shelf, its leather cover worn soft over the years. The pictures inside told a story that contradicted tonight's conversation. There was Clara at 5, toothless and laughing on my shoulders at Elitch Gardens. At 10, proudly showing her science fair model of a volcano, her high school commencement, tears on her face as she embraced us both. College drop-off day, pretending to be independent while being secretly terrified. When had she grown so defensive, so ready to believe I was against her? Maybe I was against this. Evan Thompson entered our lives 6 months ago with his designer suits and ambiguous discussions of disruptive market forces. He mentioned investors I'd never heard of and used buzzwords that were essentially meaningless. But Clara's eyes shone when he spoke, as if she were seeing a genius at work rather than a theatrical performance. I turned to Diane's favorite photograph of the 3 of us from Clara's college graduation. We seemed so whole then, so sure of what lay ahead. Diane had been gone for 2 years, but her absence could still catch me by surprise. She would have known how to navigate tonight's discussion. Diane could have asked the difficult questions without setting off Clara's defenses. The empty house felt oppressive, filled with the weight of discussions Diane and I would never have, and choices I now had to make on my own. Being a parent doesn't stop when your child reaches 18. In some ways, it becomes more difficult. At least when Clara was young, I could protect her from scraped knees and schoolyard bullies. How do you shield a grown woman from her own decisions? My phone vibrated with a text. Clara, Evan says dinner tomorrow night at 7. Le Rev on Larimer Square. I stared at the message for a long time before replying, looking forward to it. Perhaps I was being unjust. Maybe my paternal instincts were distorting my perception. Evan might be just as he appeared, a young entrepreneur who loved my daughter. The expensive wedding, the polished charm, the way he materialized whenever finances were discussed. Maybe it was all just a series of coincidences. I closed the photo album and placed it back on its shelf. Tomorrow evening, I would give Evan Thompson the benefit of the doubt. I would inquire about his business, his future plans, his feelings for Clara. I would act like the father-in-law he anticipated, not the cynical businessman I had become. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 10:30. Time for bed, though I suspected sleep would not come easily. I turned off the study lights and walked upstairs, already formulating topics for tomorrow's dinner. Common interests, shared hobbies, the kind of foundation on which relationships are built. If Evan was going to be part of the family, I would find a way to make it work. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting my tie for the 3rd time. The navy silk had been Diane's favorite. She had given it to me on our 20th anniversary, saying it made my eyes stand out. Tonight felt significant enough for Diane's tie, significant enough for the good cufflinks and the cologne I reserved for special events. 7:15. I intended to arrive precisely on time, not early enough to appear eager, not late enough to seem disrespectful. Le Rêve on Larimer Square was Evan's selection, a high-end French restaurant that likely cost more for a single meal than I once spent on a week's worth of groceries. But if this was Evan's method of impressing me, I would go along with it. I checked my wallet, credit cards, cash, and business cards in case the talk veered toward professional matters. My phone had no new messages from Clara since yesterday's confirmation. No last-minute alterations, no worried texts asking me to be kind to Evan. Perhaps she believed this would go smoothly, or perhaps she was simply confident that Evan could hold his own. The drive into the city would take 30 minutes with evening traffic. I took my keys and walked to the garage, mentally rehearsing potential conversation starters. Ask about his business, not the vague, disruptive forces nonsense, but specifics, revenue models, customer base, growth strategy. The sorts of questions that show whether someone truly grasps their own enterprise. Sports might be a safer topic. The Rockies were having a solid spring training. The Nuggets were in a rebuilding phase, neutral subjects that required no personal disclosures or professional analysis. Though Evan seemed more like a golf conversation person, expensive courses, private clubs, the kind of networking that occurs over 18 holes. I backed out of the driveway, observing the evening sun filtering through the aspen trees that lined my street. April in Denver always brought a sense of hope. Winter was finally over, with the promise of warmth on the horizon. Maybe that's what tonight symbolized as well. New beginnings, an expanding family, the natural order of life that I had been resisting. Diane would have adored planning a wedding. She would have driven Clara mad with cake tastings and floral consultations, but in the most loving way possible. She would have found common ground with Evan, welcoming him into the family with her knack for making people feel included. I was not Diane, but I could attempt to emulate her approach tonight. Traffic flowed well down I-25. I had left extra time, so arriving a few minutes early wouldn't be an issue. It might even give me a chance to see how Evan interacted with the restaurant staff. A person's character is often revealed by how they treat service workers. My phone vibrated with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it, keeping my attention on the road and the upcoming conversation. Tonight was about building bridges, finding common ground with the man my daughter intended to marry. Any business call could wait. The Denver skyline unfolded before me as I neared the city center. Glass skyscrapers reflected the setting sun. This was Evan's world. High-end restaurants, city sophistication, the lifestyle associated with wealth and ambition. Perhaps that's what drew Clara to him. After growing up in the tree-lined suburban calm of Cherry Creek, the city's dynamism probably felt thrilling, full of potential. I found a parking spot 2 blocks from Le Rêve and checked my reflection one last time in the rearview mirror. Gray hair combed, tie straight, jacket unwrinkled. I looked like what I was, a successful investment banker meeting his future son-in-law, professional yet approachable, curious but not prying. The evening air held the scent of early spring as I walked to the restaurant. In 2 hours, I would know if Evan Thompson was deserving of my daughter's affection and my financial backing. Tonight would establish the tone for whatever relationship we would have moving forward. It was time to find out what kind of man wanted to join our family. The hostess at Le Rêve led me through the main dining area to a private section at the rear. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths, and the low hum of conversation fostered an ambiance of costly elegance. I squared my shoulders, prepared to make the necessary effort this evening. The private dining room had a table for 8, with all but 1 chair occupied. Evan rose as I came near, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, here's our esteemed benefactor," he declared to the table, his voice just loud enough for everyone to hear. The other guests, Evan's sister, 2 business partners, and an older couple I didn't know, shifted uneasily in their seats. Clara gave Evan a warning look, but he paid her no mind. "Evan?" I offered my hand, resolved to make a fresh start. "Thank you for putting this dinner together." He squeezed my hand a bit too hard. Of course, especially when you have such deep pockets for the wedding. I sat down, noticing how Evan had placed himself at the head of the table, as if he were the host. The waiter filled my wine glass while I observed the faces around me. Evan's sister looked mortified. His business partners appeared well practiced in ignoring his conduct. "So, Robert," Evan went on, leaning back in his chair with clear satisfaction, "Clara tells me you're retired. It must be wonderful to have so much free time. I keep myself occupied." I maintained a level, professional tone. "What about your ventures? Clara mentioned you're developing something innovative. A few projects, actually." "You wouldn't grasp the technology." He waved a dismissive hand. "It demands a type of forward thinking that your generation finds difficult." Clara reached across the table toward Evan. He didn't mean I meant precisely what I said. Evan's focus remained on my face. "Some people are stuck in outdated ways of thinking. Investment banking, traditional portfolios, safe but dull." The older couple exchanged a look. Evan's sister studied her salad with intense focus, obviously wishing she were elsewhere. "Conventional methods have their advantages," I responded carefully. "Stability, proven results, actual revenue." "Revenue?" Evan chuckled, but the sound was devoid of humor. "How wonderfully conventional. Tell me, did you ever take a real gamble in your career, or did you just manage portfolios like everyone else?" A flush of anger rose in my neck, but I kept my composure. Every business involves calculated gambles. The skill lies in distinguishing opportunity from speculation. Spoken like a true traditionalist, Evan lifted his wine glass in a sarcastic toast. No wonder Clara had to find someone with genuine vision for her future. Clara's face turned crimson. "Evan, please. This is supposed to be a celebration." "It is a celebration. We're celebrating Clara's liberation from constrained thinking." He leaned back, visibly enjoying the situation, though I suppose we should be thankful for the financial backing, even if it comes with antiquated advice. I felt my jaw clench, but I forced my voice to stay even. "I am here because I care about Clara's happiness. I hope we can find some common ground." "Common ground?" Evan repeated the words as if they left a bad taste. "You mean the ground where you approve of my decisions, and I pretend to respect your perspective?" The waiter arrived with our main courses, creating a brief interruption, but Evan was not done. He sliced into his steak with dramatic flair, the knife scraping on the plate. "Actually, Robert, I've been considering our family dynamic going forward. Certain boundaries may be in order." Evan's wine glass was already half drained when the entrees were served. The alcohol had eroded whatever self-control he had, and his eyes held a predatory shine that unsettled me. "You know what I've realized tonight?" Evan declared loudly enough to draw looks from adjacent tables. "Family dinners are most successful when everyone understands their position." Clara's fork stopped in midair. "Evan, maybe we should." "No, let me finish." He raised his hand as if he were a conductor. "Your father seems to be confused about his role in our impending marriage." I set down my fork deliberately, feeling the familiar calm that always preceded a critical business negotiation. "I'm not sure I follow." "Oh, I believe you do." Evan leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "You see, there's something we must clarify about the wedding." The table went quiet. Even Evan's normally talkative sister stopped eating, aware of the changing mood. Evan sat up straight, his voice returning to its full volume. "Let me be clear, old-timer. You're not welcome at the ceremony tomorrow." The words struck me like a physical assault. Around the table I heard gasps and the clatter of silverware being dropped. "That is unacceptable." Clara's voice trembled with shock and fury. "Evan, you can't just—" "Actually, I can." Evan's satisfaction was tangible. "It's our wedding, Clara. We decide who should be there and who shouldn't." Evan stopped this immediately. Clara's hands were shaking as she reached for him. "This is my father you're talking about." "Yes, your father, who has challenged my every decision since we met. Evan turned back to me, his smile as sharp as a razor. Clara, your father is spoiling our evening once again. I looked at him across the table, absorbing the calculated cruelty of his actions. This was not a spontaneous outburst. It was a premeditated humiliation, staged in front of an audience to assert his dominance. The other guests sat motionless, averting their eyes as if witnessing a terrible accident. Evan's sister had her hand over her mouth. One of his business partners was examining his wineglass with great interest. I see. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate with deliberate care. Thank you for making the situation clear. Dad, please don't. Clara began to rise, but Evan's hand on her wrist held her back. Let him go, my dear. Some people just can't handle direct communication. I stood up slowly, my movements measured, despite the rage simmering within me. 40 years of business had taught me when to press an advantage and when to make a strategic retreat. This was not the time or place for a confrontation. Clara, I looked straight at my daughter, completely ignoring Evan. I love you. That will never change. Daddy, please, we can sort this out. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not pull free from Evan's grasp. Call me when you're prepared to talk. Really talk. I reached for my wallet, but Evan waved a hand dismissively. Don't worry about the bill, Robert. I'll take care of it. Of course he would with my money, funneled through Clara's bank account. I walked toward the exit with steady steps, giving a polite nod to the hostess, preserving the dignity Evan had sought to take from me. Behind me, I could hear Clara's voice rising in protest and Evan's replies becoming increasingly defensive. The cool night air hit me as I stepped out onto Larimer Square. The city buzzed around me with traffic, faint music, and the laughter of people enjoying their Friday night. Normal people with normal lives. I got my car from the valet, tipped him properly, and sat behind the wheel for a moment before turning the key. My hands were not trembling. My breathing was even. But something deep inside me had shifted. Evan Thompson had just made the gravest error of his life. The steering wheel felt firm in my hands as I drove away from the restaurant. Traffic was slow through downtown Denver, giving me time to replay Evan's words, to analyze the calculated malice behind his public shaming. My phone buzzed with a call. Clara's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. We both needed some time to digest the evening's events before any productive conversation could take place. The city lights streamed past my windows, glass towers reflecting the streetlights, pedestrians hurrying to their Friday night plans, the ordinary pulse of city life carrying on while my own world had been upended. I had entered that restaurant thinking diplomacy could resolve any issue. I left knowing that Evan Thompson was far more dangerous than a simple opportunist. On Spear Boulevard, I made an impulsive decision to head toward the water instead of driving straight home to Cherry Creek. The familiar route to Sloan's Lake beckoned, a place Diane and I used to go when we had difficult decisions to make. I parked with a view of the water, the dark lake stretching out toward an unseen horizon. The Denver skyline stood behind me, but ahead was only darkness and the distant sound of water lapping against the shore. This was where I came when business deals soured, when tough choices had to be made. Evan's actions tonight were not about guest lists or family dynamics. They were a power play, a public declaration that he had complete control over Clara. The way he had held her wrist, the satisfaction in his voice when she defended him despite his cruelty. These were not the actions of a man in love. I had spent 4 decades assessing people across boardroom tables. The desperate ones talked too much. The deceitful ones deflected questions with hostility. The truly dangerous ones took pleasure in inflicting pain. Evan Thompson took pleasure in inflicting pain. My phone buzzed again. This time, I listened to the voicemail from Clara's earlier call. Dad, I am so sorry. Evan had too much wine and is under a lot of stress with the wedding costs. He didn't mean what he said. Please call me back. We have to fix this. She was already making excuses for him, reframing the night's events to cast Evan as a victim of circumstance rather than the architect of deliberate cruelty. I had seen this behavior in business. People become so committed to poor decisions that they will rationalize anything to avoid admitting their mistake. But this was not business. This was my daughter's future. I gazed out at the lake, recalling Diane's advice during our parenting struggles. Sometimes protecting them means letting them make mistakes, but sometimes it means intervening even if they resent you for it. The question was, which situation was this? Evan's defensive aggression suggested he had secrets to protect. His vague business talk, his expensive lifestyle with no apparent income, his instant hostility toward anyone who asked questions. These were not the hallmarks of legitimate success. I started the car and got back on Spear Boulevard, heading toward Cherry Creek with a new sense of purpose. Protecting Clara might demand more than just fatherly advice. It might require the same investigative skills that had made me successful in finance, the ability to do research, to ask the right questions, and to uncover what people wanted to keep hidden. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my decision was made. I would not stand by while Evan destroyed my daughter's life from the inside. I would not hope that love would somehow triumph over blatant warning signs. Starting tomorrow, I would find out exactly who Evan Thompson really was. The lakeside wedding venue glittered in the afternoon sun, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the vast blue water. White floral arrangements cascaded from every surface, and a string quartet played softly near the dance floor, where Clara moved like a dream in her elegant gown. She looked radiant, genuinely joyful, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break on her perfect day. I straightened my tie and walked through the entrance, surveying the room with a banker's eye for strategic positioning. The reception area ran along the waterfront with several exits and clear sightlines, ideal for what was about to happen. It had been a long night. After leaving the lake yesterday evening, I had spent hours leveraging my network of contacts, following digital trails, and making a series of strategic calls, 23 in total. The 24th call connected me with Marcus Thorne, and everything had come together with the precision of a perfectly executed merger. Evan was holding court by the bar, gesturing dramatically with a champagne glass, surrounded by admirers who were captivated by his talk of disruptive technologies and revolutionary market strategies. His expensive tuxedo was a perfect fit, likely bought with someone else's money. The confident smile, the casual way he accepted well wishes, he genuinely thought he had won yesterday's battle. I took a position at the back of the room, near the service entrance Marcus would use upon his arrival. From here, I could see everything while staying out of sight. The irony was not lost on me. Standing in the shadows at my own daughter's wedding, preparing to dismantle her husband's life. Wedding guests mingled with the effortless grace that wealth affords. I recognized some faces from Evan's dinner party and others from Clara's college days. They laughed and clinked their glasses, celebrating what they thought was a beautiful love story. None of them knew they were about to witness the final act of a sophisticated con. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Parking. Papers in hand. Be there in 5. The plan was brilliantly simple. Marcus would make his entrance at the peak of the celebration when Evan felt most triumphant and had the largest audience. Public humiliation is a more potent form of justice than a private confrontation. Evan had chosen to embarrass me in front of an audience. Now he would learn how it felt to be exposed when the stakes were highest. Clara twirled across the dance floor, her dress billowing around her, her smile bright enough to light up the room. For a brief moment, my determination faltered. This was her wedding day, a day she had dreamed of her whole life. Was I about to ruin her happiness to fulfill my own need for retribution? Then I recalled Evan's words from the previous night. Your father is spoiling our evening. The calculated cruelty, the public dismissal, the way he had gripped Clara's wrist when she tried to defend me. This was not about my own hurt pride. It was about protecting my daughter from a predator who viewed her as a means to an end. Evan's laughter echoed across the room as he recounted a story to his rapt audience. He gestured toward the lake, probably claiming credit for selecting such a lavish venue. Everything about him was a performance, from his rehearsed charm to his counterfeit confidence. The string quartet shifted to a more upbeat, celebratory piece. Guests began to gather around the newlyweds for pictures. Smartphones captured what they believed was a moment of pure bliss. In a few minutes, those same phones would be recording something entirely different. I glanced at my watch. Marcus should be arriving at any moment. Evan continued his act, completely unaware that his past was about to collide with his present in a very public way. Across the room, Evan's eyes swept over the crowd, basking in the attention, savoring his short-lived victory. Then his gaze met mine. His champagne flute stopped midway to his lips. The confident smile vanished. Evan's expression shifted from celebration to rage in an instant. He handed his champagne glass to the nearest guest and began to move through the crowd with a predator's focus. His expensive tuxedo made him look like a shark in formal attire. Conversations died down as he pushed past dancing couples and chatting groups. The string quartet continued to play, but the festive atmosphere changed as guests sensed an imminent conflict. Clara looked up from her photos, her radiant face clouded with confusion. "Why are you here?" Evan's voice boomed through the reception hall, slicing through the music and laughter. "You were uninvited yesterday." The words bounced off the glass walls, reaching every corner of the room. The string quartet trailed off into silence. Guests turned to look at us, their expressions a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. Smartphones were instinctively raised to capture the unfolding drama. I stayed calm, my hands clasped behind my back, observing Evan's public meltdown with a professional detachment. This was exactly as I had planned, his arrogance on full display for all to see. "Evan, please." Clara started moving toward us, her wedding gown rustling with urgency. "Number." He held up a shaking hand, his voice cracking with a mixture of alcohol and rage. "This man insulted me, insulted our relationship, and now he has the audacity to show up uninvited to ruin our wedding." "I'm leaving," I said calmly, my voice carrying despite its low volume. "But first, allow me to introduce my special guest." I gestured toward the entrance where Marcus Thorne had just appeared, with impeccable timing. "I believe you know your old associate." Marcus Thorne drew immediate attention upon entering. Tall, with silver hair and a charcoal suit that bespoke serious wealth, he moved with the assurance of a man accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes deals. His briefcase looked both expensive and official. Evan's aggressive stance dissolved as recognition set in. His face turned pale, then ashen, the color draining from it like water from a cracked vase. "Evan Thompson." Marcus's voice had the sharp authority of courtrooms and corporate acquisitions. "I've finally located you," the wedding guests murmured, sensing that something significant was happening, but not understanding the details. Evan stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without a sound, like a fish out of water. Marcus approached with deliberate steps, each one echoing in the now silent reception hall. He opened his briefcase with practiced ease and pulled out a thick sheaf of legal documents. "Evan Thompson, you are hereby served with legal papers demanding the repayment of $1,200,000, plus accrued interest and legal costs, which you fraudulently acquired from Thorne Capital Group under false pretenses." The words landed like blows from a hammer. Evan's hands trembled as Marcus pushed the papers into them, but he seemed unable to comprehend what was happening. His meticulously crafted world was imploding in real time in front of everyone who mattered in his new life. Clara gasped, her bouquet tumbling from her limp fingers. "1 million, Evan? What is he talking about?" The wedding guests crowded closer, abandoning all pretense of polite detachment. Cell phones recorded every moment as Evan stared at the legal papers as if they were written in an unknown language. "For 2 years," Marcus continued, his voice ringing through the silent hall. For 2 years, I have been searching for you, Mr. Thompson. You vanished with my capital, left a trail of forged documents, and assumed you could start a new life with someone else's daughter. Evan's knees seemed to give way slightly. He clutched the papers with white-knuckled hands, his wedding day confidence gone like a puff of smoke. The man who had humiliated me less than 24 hours ago now looked like a trapped animal. Evan! Clara's voice was strained with rising horror. Is this true? Did you steal money? But Evan was incapable of answering. He stood paralyzed, holding the proof of his crimes, while his new bride and her wedding guests watched his carefully constructed persona crumble to dust. Evan's hands shook as he looked over the court summons, his eyes scanning the legal text that detailed his financial downfall. The sophisticated wedding venue had transformed into a courtroom, with 150 guests acting as a jury to witness his utter ruin. $1.2 million plus interest, he murmured, the numbers seemingly inflicting a physical wound. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the cool breeze from the lake coming through the open windows. His expensive tuxedo suddenly seemed like a costume, a prop in a play that had just been exposed. The guests pressed in, their celebration forgotten in favor of the unfolding spectacle. Smartphones documented every second of Evan's unraveling, capturing his shift from a confident groom to an exposed felon. The string quartet stood motionless with their instruments, unsure if they should resume playing for a party that had ceased to exist. Marcus watched Evan's reaction with professional contentment. "Robert, thank you," he said, extending his hand to me. "I've been trying to find this man for 2 years. Your business network was instrumental in locating him." "Justice had to be served," I replied simply, shaking his hand. The words resonated in the quiet reception hall, explaining everything and nothing to the baffled wedding guests. Clara stood frozen in her wedding dress, her bouquet scattered at her feet like shattered hopes. "Evan, please tell me this is not true. Tell me you didn't steal from people." But Evan could not speak. The court papers trembled in his hands as he read the specifics of forged documents, shell companies, and elaborate cons that had financed his luxurious lifestyle. Every expensive meal, every designer suit, every romantic gesture had been funded with stolen capital. "The wedding," Clara whispered as the realization hit her. "The venue, the flowers, my dress. Where did the money come from?" Evan's silence was a confession. His carefully built identity was collapsing in real time, leaving only the truth of what he was, a common thief who had used my daughter's love as a shield for his criminal activities. Marcus shut his briefcase with a firm snap. "Mr. Thompson, you have 30 days to respond to this summons. I advise you to retain a good lawyer." He turned to me with sincere appreciation. "Thank you once more, Robert. The authorities will want to speak with you about how you found him." The wedding reception had completely disintegrated around us. Guests stood in shocked groups, their whispers and pointing fingers replacing the sounds of celebration. The elegant lakeside venue, with its stunning views and perfect floral arrangements, had become the scene of a public shaming and a criminal revelation. I looked at my daughter, still beautiful in her wedding dress, but now realizing her marriage was founded on lies and theft. The pain in her eyes was palpable, but beneath it I could see the first signs of understanding. Her father had not been trying to control her life, he had been trying to protect it. "Clara," I said gently, walking to where she stood motionless amidst the fallen flowers, "I'm sorry it had to be this way." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears and confusion. You knew what he was." "I had my suspicions. I investigated. I found Marcus." I touched her shoulder lightly. "Sometimes protecting the ones we love means doing things they can't understand until much later." Evan finally spoke, but his voice was a broken whisper. "Clara, I can explain. This is just a big misunderstanding. I was going to pay it all back." "With what money?" Marcus interjected icily. "You have no legitimate business, no real income, no assets other than what you've stolen from others." The truth lingered in the air like smoke. Evan's empire of deceit had fallen in less than 10 minutes, leaving behind nothing but legal papers and shattered promises. Marcus and I walked toward the exit together, our business finished. Behind us, the elegant wedding reception continued its transformation into something like a crime scene, complete with witnesses and evidence. Justice had been delivered with perfect timing and devastating precision. The drive home felt unlike any other. The familiar tree-lined streets of Cherry Creek seemed calmer, more orderly, as if the neighborhood itself understood that a wrong had been righted. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, reflecting on the afternoon's events with the deep satisfaction of a banker who has just closed the most significant deal of his life. Inside the house, the quiet felt constructive rather than lonely. I went directly to my home office, where wedding contracts and financial records were arranged in neat piles on my desk. Diane had always admired my organizational skills. Everything was filed, labeled, and easily retrievable for moments precisely like this one. My first call was to Apex Union Bank's private banking line, where Susan Davis had managed my accounts for 15 years. Mr. Stewart, how may I help you today? Susan, I need to cancel a wire transfer scheduled for tomorrow, $50,000 to the Brown Palace Catering Services. Of course. Do you have the reference number? I read the confirmation code from my notes, hearing the clicks of her keyboard as she searched for the transaction. I've found it. This was for final payment for wedding services. Should I cancel the entire transfer? Yes. The contracts have been nullified due to the discovery of fraud. I will process that immediately. You'll get a written confirmation within 24 hours. The efficiency was gratifying. No questions, no judgment. Just professional service for a legitimate business request. Next were the calls to the vendors, systematic and methodical, each conversation noted with the same precision I had used throughout my career. The florist was the first to answer. The Stewart Thompson wedding. Oh my, we heard the reception ended rather suddenly. Is everything okay? The contracts are void due to fraud. I am stopping all payments immediately. Her tone became all business. I see. Well, the flowers were delivered and arranged. We will need to discuss partial payment for services rendered. Send me a detailed invoice. Direct any collection efforts to Evan Thompson. Each call followed a similar script. The caterer expressed concern about the early end to the reception. The band wanted to know about the final payment for their 3-hour set. The photographer inquired about the delivery of the wedding photos. I gave each of them the same professional reply. Fraud discovered, contracts voided. Pursue Evan Thompson for payment. By 7 p.m., I had made 9 calls and stopped 6 different payment authorizations. The total financial fallout would hit Evan and Clara with about $38,000 in immediate vendor invoices, money that would have to come from a source other than my bank accounts. I felt a fleeting pang of concern for Clara. She would wake up tomorrow to a financial reality she had never known, bills that her fraudulent husband could not pay with stolen money. But sometimes protecting people means letting them experience the consequences of their actions. My phone rang as I was organizing the final confirmation documents. The caller ID showed Clara. I looked at the screen for a long moment before letting the call go to voicemail. She needed time to process who Evan truly was before we could have a productive conversation. Tonight, she was likely still furious with me for ruining her wedding. Tomorrow, she might start to understand that I had saved her from something far worse. The phone rang again before I had finished filing the banking records. Clara's name appeared on the screen, vanished when I didn't pick up, and then reappeared 3 minutes later. I went to the kitchen and began to make a simple dinner. Grilled salmon, steamed asparagus, quinoa, normal, methodical, peaceful. The phone rang twice more while I seasoned the fish. In the living room, I sat in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and the evening news. Denver's mayor was discussing new public transportation initiatives. The Rockies had won their home opener. The spring weather was expected to last through the week. The phone rang during the sports report. Clara again. I sipped my tea and listened to the weather forecast, trying to recall if I had any weekend projects that might be affected by possible rain. The garden needed weeding, but that could wait until after this family crisis had passed. 15 minutes later, another call, then another. The pattern became predictable. Every 5 to 10 minutes, Clara's name would illuminate the screen. I started counting. Call 7 during the national news. Call 8 during a commercial. Call 9 when the local news anchor returned. By 8:30, the tally had reached 18. I switched to a documentary about the Amazon rainforest, finding the wildlife more calming than the drama unfolding via my phone. Even the harsh realities of survival in the wild seemed less complicated than human relationships. Call 23 came during footage of jaguars hunting. Call 24 interrupted a segment on deforestation. I refilled my tea and put on my reading glasses, preparing for what was likely to be a long night. The documentary finished at 9:15. Call count 31. I briefly surfed the channels, landing on a British detective series Diane had loved. The inspector was questioning suspects in a grand country house, each one hiding secrets that would inevitably be revealed. Art imitating life, but with better dialogue and more elegant settings. Between 9:15 and 10 o'clock, 12 more calls came in. The desperation was palpable, even without answering. The intervals between calls grew shorter, the phone barely going silent before it rang again. Call 44 came at 10:07. I turned off the television and started my nightly routine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discussions, and new chances for Clara to understand why her father had acted with such seeming cruelty. Tonight, she was learning that actions have consequences, that fraudulent husbands come with unforeseen costs, and that independence is more than just a declaration. In the bathroom, I brushed my teeth while the phone remained blessedly quiet for nearly 8 minutes. Call 45 interrupted me as I was changing into my pajamas. By the time I turned off the lights and got into bed, Clara had called 44 times in 3 hours. I set the phone to silent and placed it face down on the nightstand. She would have to navigate this crisis on her own, without her father's financial rescue. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to not answer the phone. 3 weeks later, I sat in the Denver City and County building, watching Evan Thompson receive his sentence. The man who had confidently belittled me at dinner now looked 20 years older, his designer suits replaced by jail-issued orange, his arrogant attitude crushed under the weight of multiple felony convictions. The defendant will serve 18 months in state prison and make full restitution of $1,400,000 to the victims identified in this case, Judge Ramirez declared with professional finality. Marcus leaned over from the bench next to me. 14 victims in total. The investigation uncovered a lot more than just my case. Evan had constructed a criminal enterprise based on charm and false credibility, with investment cons, fake partnerships, and forged documents. The extent of his fraud made my daughter's narrow escape seem all the more fortunate. Outside the courthouse, Marcus shook my hand with genuine appreciation. I never would have located him without your business network, Robert. Thank you for making that call. Justice had to be served, I said. The same words I had used at Clara's wedding. They still felt right. Marcus walked to his car, his briefcase filled with restitution documents that would eventually recover most of his stolen funds. I stood on the courthouse steps, watching the afternoon traffic flow by, wondering if my daughter was ready to mend our relationship. That evening, I finally called her. Dad. Her voice was different, older, more subdued, but without the defensive edge I had anticipated. Hello, sweetheart. I thought it was time we spoke. I've been waiting for your call. A pause. I found out about the other victims. 14 people, Dad. Evan stole from 14 different people. I know. I was at his sentencing today. You were there? Another, longer pause. I should have gone too, but I couldn't. I couldn't bear to see him again. You never have to see him again. The vendors have been calling non-stop. The bills, the canceled payments, I understand now what you did and why." Her voice hitched slightly. "I'm sorry I didn't trust your instincts about Evan. Come over for dinner tomorrow," I said. "We have a lot to talk about." The next evening, Clara arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, holding a bottle of wine and dressed in practical business attire that suggested she was taking her career more seriously. She looked weary but more resilient, like someone who had passed a difficult test and learned from it. "You saved me from being victim number 15, she said, as we sat down for dinner. "I protected my daughter. That's a father's job, even when his daughter is too stubborn to see it." She lifted her wine glass. "To wisdom learned the hard way." We talked late into the night about trust, independence, financial literacy, and the fine line between supporting someone and enabling them. Clara had spent 3 weeks learning what life was like without her father's financial safety net, and the experience had taught her more about self-sufficiency than any lecture ever could have. "I am going to pay you back," she said, as we cleared the dinner plates. "Every last cent, from the vendors, the wedding costs, all of it. It may take some time, but I will pay it all back. Keep your money," I told her. "Consider it payment for one of life's most valuable lessons." She hugged me then, a real hug, for the first time since before she had met Evan Thompson. Justice had been done. Family ties had been strained and then reinforced, and my daughter had come out of it wiser, more self-reliant, and finally free from the charming predator who had nearly ruined her life. We hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, consider liking this video and subscribing for more content. Let us know your thoughts on the narrative in the comments below. For our next story, please click the video on your screen. Thanks for tuning in.